Tyrite Valencia Voice. When the jury asked for clarification on the instructions regarding manslaughter, was there any nervousness between you guys and George that he would be facing the lesser charges?
My understanding was that they were confused by a confusing jury instruction. I said to the judge, Mr. West first argued one day, and before I started my closing the next day, that the manslaughter instruction is very confusing. I don't want to get into the legal part of it, and I know you don't, but if you look at it, justifiable homicide is identified within manslaughter, excusable homicide is identified within manslaughter, and somewhere separate is justifiable use of deadly force. If you try and read those, they are logically inconsistent, but not legally inconsistent. And I think that jury, as smart as they are, because they were thinking, looked at it and said, why are you telling us about excusable homicide? It's just that we had to, even though it had no application to the facts of this case. So, sure.
Hi. Hi. Yami Shalsunder with USA Today. Don West, you said that I am thrilled that this jury kept this tragedy from becoming a travesty. Can you talk about what the tragedy you're talking about? We talked about civil rights issues here, people not falsely or wrongly linking it to race. Could you just tell me a little bit more what you mean by that tragedy into a travesty?
The tragedy is the loss of Trayvon Martin's life in every respect. Regardless of what he was doing or immediately what led up to it, it's a tragic loss of life. It not only will impact, of course, Trayvon Martin's family and all those that knew him forever and ever. This event itself also impacts George Zimmerman forever and ever and ever. This is something no one gets over. There's no winners here. There's no monsters here. That's the tragedy. The travesty, it would have been a travesty of justice had George Zimmerman been convicted. That's the travesty.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate the time. I think that was, someone said it was the last question, so.
Just very, please. Iris Delgado with Univision National Network. From your private conversations with George Zimmerman, what was the most compelling statement from George Zimmerman that made you believe in his innocence?
There's not just one, but if you really want to look at the statements, the first opportunity that he could say something about this case, he said, I was screaming out for help and nobody came. When Officer Serino challenged him and said, I think there may be a video of this, he said, thank God. I dismiss with disgust the state's suggestion that he was some cop wannabe savant who knew that he could take on that bluff. I think that really speaks to what George was going through that night and how he presented it. So that, if you want to look for some insight from him, that was it.
Did he ever cry to you?
I'm sorry?
Did he ever cry to you, showed you emotion?
Absolutely. 16 months of being, some people called him the most hated man in America for having defended his own life only after getting beat for 45 seconds. And then a man who believes in the system, whose dad was a judge, who maybe wanted to be a cop or a prosecutor, then gets a system. Two systems went against George Zimmerman that he can't understand. You guys, the media, he was like a patient in an operating table where mad scientists were committing experiments on him and he had no anesthesia. He didn't know why he was turned into this monster, but quite honestly, you guys had a lot to do with it. You just did, because you took a story that was fed to you and you ran with it and you ran right over him. And that was horrid to him. Then he comes into a system that he trusts. Let's not forget, 6 voluntary statements, voluntary surrender. And he believes in a system that he really wanted to be part of, right? And then he gets prosecutors that charge him with a crime they could never, ever prove. It's not like they didn't lose evidence along the way, right? So I don't think anyone would argue with me in this room that they had evidence of second-degree murder. This in-your-heart kind of stuff, that's not what we're supposed to do, and it's not what they're supposed to do. So those two systems failed them.
Thank you.
Thanks.